My dad was in partnership with another guy called Terry Keys, and when I was younger, about 8 or 9, he used to take me around to the lofts, and he used to let me go and play about with the stock pigeons. And I remember at school at about 10 or 11, always thinking about pigeons and having my own loft at one day and not concentrating really well on doing the exams, but always worried about pigeons. So I don't know, I just fell in love with them really. The biggest influence on me was obviously my dad, who initially got me into the pigeon racing. You know, we were very good at club level, me and my dad, for a long period of time, and we wanted to up our game international level, and we met Jeff Cooper. Jeff Cooper was the biggest influence to take me on from club racing to national racing when I first met him, and he was probably the best at the time in the national racing. When I was 14, I raced with, I went round and tried to persuade every friend at school that pigeon racing was, you know, we could make fortunes out of pigeon racing by winning all these big nationals, and managed to convince a friend who had a garden, because we didn't have a garden where I lived, a guy called Nigel Granderson, to start up pigeon racing. So we formed a 6 foot by 6 foot shed, and we raced them there. I remember the first young bird season, we were 6th. And that was the only time we ever scored, so it was the 6th club, and we were over the moon with that. And the following year, we started off in the inland races, and we were miles a long way behind, and we sent to a race Nantes, and it was a really fast race, and we were 1st and 2nd club. I remember the flyers saying, anyone can win a blow home, and we sent the pigeons back 2 weeks later to a place Portiers, and it was really one of the hardest races ever, and we weren't to know that because we were novices, and we were 1st and 2nd club again. So that's how we got into it. I really enjoy the most long distance racing, because I don't think the wind plays a part in long distance racing so much, and it's always been a passion when you get a pigeon late at night, and and you're waiting there and not whether you're going to get it or not. It really gives me a big buzz. I start racing at the first race. You've got to get the pigeons gradually in condition to do the long distance. You can't. It's like running a marathon. You can't jump them from 100 metres into a marathon without any training on the way. So I start on the first race in the club, which is normally about the 14th of April, and they're going there as training races, the distance pigeons, because they're not quick enough to win them kind of races, because they're the pigeons bred to fly sort of 15, 16, 20-hour races, and they're not quick enough. They can't do it, the same speed. But we need them races to condition them. So we send them to normally the first 3 club races, and then normally to a club channel race or a small national race. But these are not to win the race. They're just to condition the pigeons for the next stage. You can't fly 10 hours before you fly 4 hours. You need to gradually work the pigeons up to the marathon race. And in my opinion, you need 2 10-hour races before you can fly the 15 hours. The organisations I'm part of is the National Flying Club, the British International Championship Club. My local fed's the BB&O. We also compete sometimes in the BBC, because we need enough races to get the good pigeons in conditions. So we often send to 3 channel races on the trot. The problem with the federation now is they're all much shorter races, and people aren't so keen to go across the channel now. The origin's been changing depending on what distances I wanted to go. I mean, the initial origin was a pigeon called Southfield Supreme, and he was more of a middle distance pigeon from a guy called Van Elsacker, and I crossed him back into the distance pigeons, and they produce really great pigeons from 400 to 600 miles. For about 10 years I was flying that kind of pigeon with the Brockamp cross into them. They were as good as anything, from Tarbes National 560 miles to, from 400 to 600 miles. On a 2-day race when they needed more, the pigeons weren't capable of doing that kind of distance. After doing very well at them distances, I decided I'd try to go the 2-day at Barcelona, Perpignan and races like that, which are a lot harder. My passion is trying to win the Barcelona International, which these pigeons weren't capable of doing. So recently I've invested a lot of money into more Holland and also Belgium, Barcelona International pigeons. I'm creating a family around them now to try and have a go at Barcelona. We've had some success at the moment, but it was a plan about 4 years ago, and it takes time to get the team that you want to get together. Some good friends of mine, when I mentioned that I was going to start sprint middle distance, bred me some pigeons. So the bases are Les Green and Mark Walker, who's a very good friends with a guy called Rudy Van Reef. We sent 24 pigeons over. So we had that was a sprint team, and the middle distance team was my old national winners paired to, and then we bought some pigeons off, some Vanderbilis and some middle distance pigeons to add into them, and we bred them ones ourselves. These were my stock lofts, and I've recently got Nigel Langstaff to manage the stock birds for me, and we've built lofts, new lofts down on the south coast. And yeah, so now we've decided for the first time ever to change these lofts into a sprint middle distance loft. So that will be the young bird loft, and this will be the old bird sprint middle distance loft. And we're going to race 18 pair of inland in the club fed. And we're going to just keep them inland, and 32 pair we're going to race in the shorter channel races. You know, the 1 day channel races up to 300 mile. Because the long distance pigeons, you know, they're not quick enough for them races. So we're going to start concentrating and trying to have a good team for them now. The most important thing to me is that pigeon has won directly off of them. You can see where that came from in the pedigree. I don't like pigeons that win with nothing behind the pedigree. You know, I like to see how it won. It came back from maybe a grandchild of a champion or something like that, or its parents also won. I don't like to see when you look at a pedigree, there's just a winner. You can't see where it's come from in the back of the pedigree. So the pedigree is number one. Handling, if I had a choice, although it's not a must, I prefer them to small to medium. But then I'm looking for middle distance, long distance. When I say that, I'm not sure. Sprint's probably different. Quite a firm believer, if they're lighter, it's a lot easier for them to fly quicker because it's like a plane. You know, if you take Jumbo or Concorde, so they're a bit more aerodynamic. I don't have any of them theories, to be honest with you. I mean, I've had pigeons with brilliant throats, brilliant wings, brilliant everything, and an absolute perfect pigeon, and then can't win. When I started pigeons, and when I was in my 20s, I did have all them theories, and I used to, you know, not buy a pigeon unless it had that, and not look at the pedigree, and I was pretty poor. But since I changed my theory, thinking I'm not going to do it, I'm going to look more on the pedigree, then I became a lot better. Normally we pair up in December, the stock pigeons, probably the second week in December, and we breed the youngsters then. The race birds are pretty similar really. I mean, I pair in the winter months the race birds because we're flying the long distance and Perpignons in August. They won't molt. When you're on youngsters or sitting, they won't molt in the winter. So you take the youngsters away, don't let them resit, and then the pigeons won't drop a flight until they get to Tarbes National. We give them a canker treatment and we obviously worm them. As long as there's no other looking health problems, we don't do anything else. We send drop-ins to the vet to make sure there's no worms or high cocci count or anything like that. And if there was, we would treat. If there's no problem there, but we still canker. We take three rounds off the main pigeons, and then some of them we use as feeders for the main pigeons. We have 15 individual sections. We introduce a hen, let them lay and underlay the eggs. The feed programme is obviously lots of multivitamins and grit. We use Versalaga breeding, but other breeding mixtures with more protein in. We find they don't eat a lot of maize. Apart from that, we give them vitamins once a week. In the winter, after the young bird season, I take all the old bird, I shut all the old bird boxes, the ones I still have left, and I transfer them into the young bird loft, and I introduce the young birds with their hens into the old bird loft, and that happens at maybe the second week in September, and I leave them in there till December, and they pair up and they find the other nest boxes and they're sitting and they go through cycles, and sometimes it's the odd youngster in there, so they're all finding the boxes of the lost pigeons and finding their position in the loft. And then on the 1st of December I take the hens away and introduce the old cocks back on the 1st of December. And then normally by the end of December I would pair my race birds. So the young cocks have found their boxes in and the old cocks go back in. And when you introduce them back in on the 1st of December, there's a little bit of a, you know, they want to find their position in the loft. So there's a few fights, but they're settled when I repair in January. And the reason I do that is because I find the yearlings have settled much more to the loft because I'm letting them out from now till December with their pairs, you know, they're going in and out the loft, and so they get bonded to the loft a lot better than when I introduce them in the end of February or February, you know, when we pair up. I don't give them any medicine in the winter because I want their immune system to fight things like respiratory and the normal stuff. In the winter I have a strict policy, it's just water and food, and if something gets a little bit of respite, it's got to get over it. If it doesn't get over it, it's gone. But before we pair up, we have a check on the pigeons with the vet, and to make sure we see what there is, if there's a high canker count, or if there is some kind of canker count. Respiratory, I think I can normally tell. If there's no big issues, or you can't see any signs of respiratory, I'll leave it. And, obviously if there's worms, I'd treat them for worms. If there's canker, I'd treat for canker. But 90% of the time we get a clean bill of health, and then I'd leave them. I don't do anything then. I always medicate the pigeons for canker and respiratory before we start. But without it, I give them a 3 days before we start the season. I have repaired twice, but normally I just, like, as I said earlier, pair them earlier in the year, let the youngsters rear to about 20 days, but never let them reset because that's when they're going to chuck the next flight. I have repaired sort of at the end of March. If you do that, you don't want them sitting more than 3 days because otherwise they drop a flight. And for the longer races at the end of the year, we want them, only just dropping a flight by the end of June, really. What we do, we make sure they're flying a whole month for an hour around the loft before we even start training. And we only train the old birds twice in the year, but we give them 2 20-mile tosses a week apart back to the system where, you take them and then they all come back together and spend a day together, and then we split them. And then the next time, a week later, we do the same thing. To get them fit in March and it's colder weather, I only let them out once and then try and get them to fly an hour. Around the middle of April, I would say, then we start letting out twice a day. We gradually push them. We don't try and get them to do an hour straight away, but they need to be doing an hour, I think, for 3 to 4 weeks. So you have to gradually, it's like your fitness, you have to gradually get them into fitness. So we start with 10 minutes and then 15, 20, gradually push them until they get them fit. Road training is twice, 1 week apart before the old bird season. The only time we would road train again is before we go south with the first channel race. We take them one training toss for about 40 miles in the direction of the channel race. And the reason we do that is because we found if you don't do that, the first channel race is normally you're behind. The system of flying my old birds is, I call it widowhood. The hens and cock are parted and both let out twice a day for an hour. On a Friday, we basket the pigeons, but we don't show the hens and cocks. And that's not because we think it's not beneficial, it's because of the amount of pigeons we've got, we haven't got the time to show the cocks and hens and pick them individually. They come back on from race and we leave them the whole day and we split them up the following morning. So they get used to the system that every time they're in the basket, they come back and they've got a day with the cock and together. Every race I leave the pigeons, whether it's 100 mile or 200 mile, they stay overnight. There's no target for them, it's just a matter of getting enough racing behind them to get them fit for the long races. So I'm not worried, as long as they don't let you down, I'm not worried whether they're scoring or what happens. Their judgment is when they go to the 500 mile race, because that's what they're bred to do. My feed programme, from when I pair to the first race, is a lighter corn, probably 50% depurative and maybe even 50% Dura Plus, because we don't want the weight on the pigeons during that time. And bear in mind, we're not sending them sending them to long races where the weight's coming off of them. We feed lighter then, but not to the stage where they're hungry. We give them as much as they want, but no more. When we race, we change the corn to Superstar Plus twice a day, morning and night. But when we're going up to a 500-mile race, the last 3 to 4 days, depending on, we obviously look on the internet and get a gauge on how hard the race is going to be. Is the wind on their nose? Is it boiling hot? We would increase the fat depending on how hard the race. So if it's a 500-mile race and it looked like the wind was behind them, probably 2.5 days worth of fat. When we say fat, we feed them the normal corn, and then afterwards we feed the fat. Oil, peanuts, hemp, sunflower seeds, so we're increasing the fat. And the reason we do that for is because the pigeons have cells and we need to fill the cell up with the fat. They obviously race on carbohydrates the first part of the race, but when the carbohydrates run out, they need the fat in the cell as a release of energy so that they can keep coming without dropping and finding food to get more energy. So if the race is under 4 hours, I would only feed the normal corn without any fat. They get used to the system that they're going to be with the hens. I think they understand basket, they're going to see the hen. I mean, that's the biggest motivation, and the love for the loft. Although I do have some motivation boxes, I call them, where I move them around the shed, maybe trying to gain a little bit of added motivation from a cockbird, or get 2 cocks that want the same kind of space. I think that works sometimes, but not all the time. But generally, they just get to know the system, that the hen is there when they return all the cock. My old birds, race-wise, would start with the first 3 inland races. Then we give them normally 3 or 4 small channel races on the trot. And then we have the 16 days off for the long distance race. So they'd have the 16 days race where they just go around the loft. I think it's really important that the pigeons are worked hard, but if it's straightforward or fairly straightforward race, then they have four small channel races on the trot. When I say small channel races, I'm talking about 200 to 300 miles, depending. If we have a really bad one though, then I'd rest them and have a week off. They go every week, unless they've had a bad time on the week, and I can say, they'll give them a rest. But yeah, I think at 200 to 300 miles, they should be able to recover and go back. When the pigeon comes back from a race, we use probiotics and electrolytes for a couple of days, and we also add animal protein, because animal protein repairs the muscle. We put that on the corn for 2 or 3 days to repair the muscle. I have 3 different sections, exactly near enough the same. All hold 50 cocks each, so we start with about 150 widowhood cocks at the beginning of the year. Raise some widowhood all year round, hens and cocks, and yeah, I mean the boxes layouts. I mean we used to have them only at the back, and what we found was there wasn't much competition. So a good fancier said to me that if you have some boxes in different places, like there's more competition for the pigeon, and we feel that's important because they like to fight for their own area. And then we have an aviary on front, and when the pigeons are paired, we keep the aviary open, and in the winter we keep the aviary open, and they're fully paired because obviously there's a lot of pigeons in here then. And when we're racing, we close the aviary, so we don't let the cocks out in the aviary because we don't want any draft coming through the loft. And sometimes across the fields they can really pick up a lot of wind. And so that's what we do, and we race them lots on the ventilation systems at the front here. These balls, I mean, yeah, they need to be a bit deeper than they are now, but I mean, we have these on the floor so the hens, they don't like to go in them, and to stop them pairing in the corners and nests. We get the odd pair now and again, but it does stop them. The deeper they are, the better. The V perches are, look, I mean, you can have the standard V perches, but we've got these on, the German perches, and we put something in the back to make sure that they can't get 2 hens that can nest in the perch. We rake them daily to make sure rake the balls, and the droppings go underneath the floor. These pigeons don't have access to this aviary, no, they just go in and out of it. So so we don't let them have access to the aviary. We keep them. We don't like the draft. This is one section we race like that, but the other 2 sections we do let them have access to the aviary. I darken my young birds. I put them on darkness at the end of the March because that's when the days get longer. I have 3 different rounds. 3 different rounds go into the same loft. The problem is more that it delays the other pigeons flying, really, because they go out and then they make the other pigeons lazy. But what happens after the 3rd round? We get to a certain stage and then we make them fly. Normally, if we're breeding early youngsters, then I don't let them out that often because we have problems with the sparrowhawk. So I just let them out enough once a week. They go out and they know how to come back in. The 3rd round comes, and I let the lot out together. For me, I like to see them flying over an hour before I think about training. Normally my youngsters would roam and fly very well, and this year it's the first year I brought sprint middle distance pigeons in, and for whatever reason they didn't roam, and I was a little bit concerned about it, thinking maybe I'm not going to have such a good year or lose them in training, but we hardly lost a pigeon in training and had a fantastic year with them. My feed with the young birds, as soon as I wean them, is on Superstar Plus, and they stay on that corn for all the time. That's the base corn. I don't add any fats to the young birds because I don't fly the distance over 4 hours with the young uns, so we're not adding any fat or any energy corn to the young birds. It's just a base corn of Superstar Plus. When you start letting them out, we feed them. They get used to calling them in when I'm feeding them before. If they don't come in, then obviously they miss that feed. Youngsters, I don't treat them at all until before the first race, and then we give them a respiratory course and a canker course. Normally you have young bird sickness all the time. This year I had a vaccine for paramoxide and E. coli. It's a joint vaccine and it comes from Poland, and that's the first year I've never had the young bird sickness. I road train my youngsters 1 month before the first race starts. We start at sort of 8 mile. And we make sure they're coming out the 8 mile first, and then we move them up. The maximum distance we took them this year was 35 mile. This year with the sprint youngsters, 3 weeks before we went morning and night, 35 mile in the morning and 25 mile in the night, and we've done that all the way through the year. They never went out around the loft. When the racing started, it was twice a day, and on Friday mornings, 25 mile in the morning. My distance pigeons, when we give them two 40-mile tosses, one on a Tuesday, one on a Thursday. After the young bird season, we lock them up and we just feed malting corn and clean water, and we've never had a problem getting through the malt. I've raced my young birds normally. I would normally give them two channel races, and then what comes out the two channel races, I put them by. This year I didn't put them on dark, which is the first time I haven't put them on dark. I sent them to the first channel race with the intention of sending them to the next channel race, but they were just too bad in the malt. They're all paired together, some were on eggs, some, I flew on the natural system. We have two different lofts for young birds. This is the young bird loft for the distance pigeons. This is only this year we've started to race sprint middle distance pigeons, but with the young birds this year, distance pigeons, they're more 700, 800 mile pigeons, so more of a slower pigeon. We've decided not to race them on the dark, and it's the first year we've decided not to race them, and this year we give them a lot of training, a couple of inland races and one channel race, and then put them by. We used to race them on the dark and give them more racing, more channel racing, but the pigeons are a slow developing pigeon, and more because of the distance. So we've decided that they don't compete at these short channel races. So we've now decided to not race them on the dark and get a different team for the sprint and middle distance. This is the young bird loft. I race the young birds sprint middle distance loft. I mean, as you can see, we had the boxes from the stock pigeons in here. So they had the aviary and they had the loft, and we let them pair, and the V perches. We just let them pair in here. So we had some on eggs, and we just raced them like that. How many? We started with 118 young birds when we started training, and we gave them 10 races, and we ended up with 96. I'm not sure it would have died so fast if the clubs were bigger, because then no one would very much dominate, and I think then and you get more of a social event. Biggest challenge is to try and get young people involved in the sport. I'm hoping. I know in Romania and China and different places like that it's sort of the young people are coming into the sport. I think in the UK we need to learn why that is, and understand why it's so popular in them kind of countries now. The biggest thing is, one, to make sure the loft's right. It needs to be a ventilated loft where fresh air gets into it without any draft, and it's got to be dry. I think the loft is very important, because even if you buy the best pigeons and the loft's not right, you're not going to win. Buy one instead of 10, if I can explain that. It's no good having 10 average pigeons. It's better to have one quality pigeon that you're breeding from and base a loft around that pigeon. I remember the biggest highlight for me when I was 15 and clocking out of Poe, and today it's probably the most emotional time I ever done. And we sent 4 pigeons and we were 200th. The international winner with Supreme was probably the highlight of my career, because at that time I didn't think it was possible. I didn't really believe you could get pigeons in a north-east wind at 540 mile on the day, and then a pigeon came at 6:15, and he had a son that looked identical to him, and I'd let the widowhood cocks out, and when it dropped I thought, what's wrong with his son? I didn't think it was him, because he didn't look distressed at all. So I threw a ball at him and trying to get him to fly with the other cocks, and then about another 3 minutes later he came down again, and I thought, there's something wrong with that pigeon. Anyway, I opened up the loft, and his box was on the right and his son's was in the middle, and he went into his box. And then I realised it was him, and hell, I didn't have the clock ready, I didn't have the thimbles ready, because I didn't think you could get a pigeon. So we were running around like a lunatic and clocked him. But the thrill to realise you were winning the international out of 17,000 pigeons, and then going to bed overnight and worrying whether it would be beat by someone in Holland going through the night, getting up next morning and finding it wasn't, was amazing. So I'd say that's the biggest thrill I've had in pigeon racing so far. I think I've been lucky enough to win most races, so the one that's the biggest challenge for me now is Barcelona, because it's the biggest race in the world, and it's the hardest race I've found to try and get pigeons from. Every day I love getting up and being with them, and looking around and seeing what's happening in the pigeon loft, and just generally handling them and playing about with the pigeons is what I enjoy doing on a daily basis. The greatest feeling for me in pigeon racing is the excitement of clocking from anywhere, really. I mean, obviously, the longer the race is, the more excitement that is, because it's an achievement over a period of time to get that pigeon to fly that long distance. But I still get the buzz when the pigeon comes from 80 miles. That first pigeon, that excitement, it's here, you know, is what I love about pigeon racing.